night is endless. Beyond the cave mouth, the world lies frozen under a vast blanket of snow, silent except for the mournful whistle of the wind as it snakes through valleys and howls against cliffs. Inside, a fragile sound pierces the stillness, the cry of an infant. That small, quivering voice is almost swallowed by the storm outside, yet within the darkness of the cave it becomes the most urgent signal of all, a reminder that survival is not just about fire, food, or shelter, but about protecting the smallest, most fragile spark of human life. Imagine the Ice Age not as an abstract chapter in history, but as a lived reality. Temperatures plunge far below freezing. Entire landscapes vanished beneath glaciers. Herds of mammoths and reindeer roamed in search of grazing, while predators lurked in the edges of every settlement. For our prehistoric ancestors, every night in winter was a battle against extinction. For a grown hunter, a failed hunt might mean hunger. For a newborn child, one night of exposure could mean the end. Against this backdrop of danger, the cry of a baby was more than just a sound. It was a question posed to the entire community. Can you protect me from the cold? The fragility of human infants made them the most vulnerable beings in the Ice Age world. Unlike many animal offspring who could walk or run within hours of birth, human babies were helpless for years. They could not feed themselves, could not regulate their body temperature, and could not defend against the cold. A baby's skin, soft and thin, lost heat quickly. Without the warmth of a body, without the shelter of a fire, without the cocoon of furs, survival was nearly impossible. The contrast between the eternal winter outside and the fragile life within became the central drama of existence. Each child who survived represented a triumph against the odds, a victory not only of biology but of love, ingenuity, and community. Yet, this struggle for survival was not bleak alone. It also revealed a resilience and adaptability that made humans unique. Unlike other creatures of the Ice Age, our ancestors did not rely solely on instinct. They adapted, innovated, and found ways to protect their infants against conditions that seemed impossible. Fire was carried carefully, sometimes glowing embers wrapped in moss to ensure that flame never died. Skins and furs were crafted not only into clothing for hunters, but into blankets for babies. Mothers pressed their infants against their own bare skin, sharing body heat in a bond that was both intimate and life-saving. The story of how babies survived the cold is, in truth, the story of how humanity itself endured. Think of the scene inside a cave. Shadows flicker across rough stone walls as flames dance on the hearth. A mother cradles her child close to her chest, wrapped in layers of hide. Nearby, another woman tends a fire, feeding it carefully with twigs and dried bones, making sure the warmth never falters. A man sits at the entrance, spear in hand, listening for the footsteps of wolves or the rustle of something larger. Behind him, the rest of the tribe huddles together, their bodies forming a circle of protection around the newborn. This was not merely instinct. It was cooperation, the earliest form of collective parenting, born out of necessity. The cry of a baby demanded not just one pair of hands, but the vigilance of many. To modern ears, the sound of an infant crying might stir feelings of tenderness or mild frustration. But in the Ice Age, it was a warning signal. A hungry cry meant food had to be found. A pain cry might mean sickness, injury, or cold creeping into fragile limbs. Ignoring such sounds was unthinkable, for every child was a future hunter, a future mother, a future hope. Each one carried the possibility of continuing the lineage. Without them, the line of survival snapped. This is why so many rituals, so much energy, and so many resources were devoted to protecting the smallest members of the group. Archaeological evidence supports this emphasis. In burial sites across Europe and Asia, remains of infants have been discovered carefully laid to rest, sometimes with small ornaments or animal teeth as offerings. Such care in death suggests even greater care in life. The fact that any child survived at all during winters of minus 20 or 30 degrees demonstrates the extraordinary lengths families went to shield them from the elements. It was not luck alone. It was deliberate, communal effort, a mixture of strategy, compassion, and necessity. But survival was never guaranteed. One night without fire, one misstep during migration, one predator breaking through the fences could erase everything. Imagine the fear of parents, knowing that one mistake could silence that fragile cry forever. Yet imagine also the joy, the fierce determination when a child survived a winter, when spring arrived and the baby had grown stronger, fed on milk and warmth and love. That victory, repeated across countless generations, is the reason we exist today. Every viewer, every listener of this documentary is descended from those who managed to protect their infants against the frozen night. This story is not only about physical survival, but about the emotional foundations of humanity. Love, care, and tenderness were as essential as spears and fire. Without them, the species would have vanished. The cry in the frozen night was a test, and our ancestors answered it. They turned caves into shelters, fires into guardians, furs into blankets, and communities into protective circles. They created rituals of care, strategies of warmth, and traditions of protection. In doing so, they shaped not only the survival of babies, but the very nature of what it means to be human. As we begin this journey to the Ice Age world, remember that image. A baby crying against a howling wind, a mother pressing her child to her chest, a fire glowing in the dark. It is a simple image, yet it carries the entire weight of our history. Without scenes like this, repeated 1,000 times across frozen landscapes, humanity would never have survived. What follows in this story is not just a chronicle of how cavemen lived, but of how they endured the coldest nights of the Ice Age, and how they made sure their children did, too. To understand how prehistoric families protected their children, we must first step into the Ice Age world itself, a place of extremes, both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Imagine standing on a ridge tens of thousands of years ago. Below stretches an endless landscape of white and gray. Glaciers rise like walls of frozen stone, towering higher than cathedrals, creeping forward year after year, reshaping valleys, crushing forests, and locking rivers beneath their heavy weight. The air is sharp, biting against skin, and every breath burns in the lungs. Winter is not a season here. It is a ruler, unchallenged, merciless, and eternal. The Ice Age was not one long, unbroken freeze, but a period of shifting climates, with cycles of bitter cold glacial ages followed by shorter, warmer interludes. Yet for our ancestors, the memory of warmth was fleeting. Most of the time, the world they inhabited was unforgiving. Europe, Asia, and North America were blanketed by ice sheets stretching thousands of miles. What is now fertile farmland lay buried under layers of snow. Even rivers froze so solid that mammoths and humans alike could walk across them. The sun, when it appeared, was pale and weak, offering little comfort. For a newborn child, this was not just a difficult environment. It was lethal, but while the cold threatened extinction, it also created opportunities. Herds of giant mammals, from woolly mammoths to steppe bison, adapted to these harsh climates, and their migrations became the lifeblood of human survival. Hunters followed them across plains, across icy valleys, across mountains. Where the herds went, food and clothing followed. Yet, this relationship was precarious. A successful hunt could feed an entire group for weeks. A failed hunt could mean hunger, despair, and infants weakened by lack of nourishment. The contrast between plenty and famine was stark, and the line between life and death razor thin. Picture a prehistoric group traveling across a wind-swept steppe in midwinter. The ground crunches underfoot, every blade of grass frosted and brittle. Children are bundled in furs, carried close to their mothers, while hunters scan the horizon for signs of movement. In the distance, a faint line of dark shapes moves slowly across the snow, reindeer, seeking sparse patches of grazing land. The tribe's survival depends on reaching them, on driving them into traps or bringing one down with spears tipped in stone. The cold presses in from all sides, numbing fingers, stinging eyes, whispering constantly the risk of stopping, of resting too long. In this world, hesitation could be fatal, but not every danger came from hunger or frost. The Ice Age was also home to predators of extraordinary size and power. Saber-toothed cats prowled the shadows, capable of striking down even the strongest prey. Packs of wolves followed human groups, waiting for weakness, ready to snatch away the vulnerable. Cave bears emerged from their dens, defending territory or seeking food during scarce months. To carry an infant across such a landscape was to risk everything, yet it was also unavoidable. Babies could not be left behind. They were carried in arms, on backs, swaddled in furs, their survival intertwined with the tribe's ability to keep moving. Every step was a gamble. And yet, even in this frozen wasteland, there were moments of beauty and possibility. The northern skies flared with the shimmering lights of the aurora. Frozen rivers gleamed like crystal under the moon. On rare warm days, flowers pushed through the melting snow, and for a brief moment the land seemed gentle. These small reprieves gave hope, reminding our ancestors that even the harshest winters were not absolute. The earth could still offer life if one knew how to find it. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture of this duality. Campsites show layers of ash from repeated fires, suggesting constant battles against the cold. Piles of bones reveal both the success of hunts and the grim reality of waste. Every part an animal used to its fullest: meat for food, fat for lamps, bones for tools, skins for clothing. In some sites, mammoth bones have been arranged into circular patterns, forming the frames of shelters, covered with hides to keep out the wind. These were not just practical creations. They were statements of defiance, humanity carving warmth and order into a world of ice. The Ice Age world was therefore both a threat and a teacher. It punished the careless, but rewarded the inventive. It was a crucible that shaped human endurance, forcing cooperation, adaptation, and creativity. Infants, fragile as they were, became the very reason to endure. They embodied the future, the promise that the human story would continue despite the glaciers, despite the storms, despite the predators. Protecting them was not only instinct but a necessity for survival as a species. To grasp the true weight of this environment, imagine being a mother clutching her baby close as the wind screams outside your shelter. You can feel the child's small body trembling, and you know the fire must last until morning, because without it, warmth will vanish and the night will claim what you hold most dear. Now imagine the relief of dawn breaking, the fire still glowing, your child still breathing softly against your chest. That fragile victory, repeated countless times across thousands of years, is what allowed humanity to step out of the Ice Age at all. The Ice Age world was therefore not simply a stage for survival, but shaping force. It demanded that humans learn to tame fire, to craft tools, to build shelters, and to cooperate in ways no other species did. It forced them to value the weak, to carry their infants with tenderness and strength through impossible conditions. In its cruelty, it revealed humanity's resilience. In its beauty, it offered fleeting glimpses of the promise of tomorrow. This was a land of peril and possibility. And from within it, the cry of the newborn would rise, fragile yet determined against the frozen silence. Among all the challenges of the Ice Age, none was greater than keeping newborns alive. A hunter could endure hunger for days. A seasoned woman could withstand bitter winds. And even elders, though frail, had long built up resilience. But infants, small, helpless, and delicate, were the most vulnerable lives within a prehistoric community. Their survival was never guaranteed. Each child born into that frozen world represented a gamble against overwhelming odds, a fragile flame threatened constantly by the winds of extinction. The biology of human infants made them uniquely fragile in a world of predators and cold. Unlike many animals who could walk, feed, or even defend themselves within hours of birth, human babies were helpless for years. Their skulls were soft, their muscles undeveloped, their skin thin and ill-suited for harsh temperatures. A newborn could not shiver effectively to generate warmth. Their bodies lost heat at alarming rates, and once their core temperature dropped, recovery was often impossible. In the Ice Age, where nights plunged at deadly lows, the smallest lapse in warmth could mean death before morning. Anthropologists suggest that infant mortality rates in prehistory were devastatingly high. Some estimates argue that nearly half of all children born never reached adolescence. Archaeological findings support this grim reality. Numerous Ice Age burial sites contain the tiny bones of babies and children, carefully placed in graves. Sometimes they are accompanied by beads or animal teeth, tokens of grief or symbols of protection. The presence of such burials tells us two things. First, that death in infancy was heartbreakingly common. Second, that even in the face of constant loss, parents and communities still valued these lives deeply, enough to mourn them and lay them to rest with care. Imagine the emotional weight this carried. A mother giving birth in the dead of winter would know instantly that her child's first breaths were also its greatest danger. Every moment became an urgent struggle to keep the fire burning, to wrap the baby in furs, to ensure milk was available. The cry of the infant was both a relief and a warning. Silence could mean the child had fallen into sleep, or it could mean something far worse. In this precarious balance, love and vigilance were inseparable. The need to protect infants also shaped the very structure of prehistoric communities. Unlike many mammals who abandon or lose offspring without lasting consequence, humans could not afford such losses. Every baby represented the survival of the group itself. A tribe with too few children faced eventual extinction, unable to replace lost hunters or caregivers. This is why we see evidence that prehistoric groups pooled resources and effort into child rearing. The fragility of infants forced humans to cooperate more deeply, creating networks of shared responsibility. Mothers, fathers, siblings, grandparents, and others all contributing to the baby's protection. In many ways, the helplessness of newborns was not just a burden, but a catalyst for social bonds that defined humanity. But fragility also meant unpredictability. A sudden illness could sweep through a shelter and claim the youngest first. An unexpected storm could extinguish fire and bring freezing winds inside. Predators, hearing the soft cries of a child, might be drawn toward the smell of humans, each danger amplified by the baby's weakness. For parents, the terror was constant. How you shield something so defenseless in a world so merciless? And yet, it was precisely because of this vulnerability that innovation flourished. Mothers learned to swaddle infants in layers of furs, trapping heat close to their bodies. Babies were carried against the skin, benefiting from the warmth of their mothers' or caregivers' own bodies, a practice that continues in many traditional cultures today. Fathers and hunters risked their lives to bring back the richest sources of fat and meat because they knew nursing mothers needed strength to feed their infants. The fragility of babies spurred adaptation, and those who found better ways to protect their young passed on not only their genes but their strategies for survival. The contrast is striking when compared to the wild. A foal could stand and run within hours of birth. A wolf pup, though dependent, would be raised in the safety of a den until strong enough to emerge. Human babies, however, demanded constant attention, day and night, for months and years. This extended dependence forced humans into closer contact with one another. The very weakness of infants became a strength for the species, forging deeper family ties and stronger communal bonds. Fragility, paradoxically, became the root of resilience. Consider a mother and child huddled inside a dark cave, the baby swaddled in skins. The fire crackles, but the winds outside shriek as though they might tear down the mountain itself. The baby stirs, whimpers, and begins to cry, its tiny voice echoing against the stone walls. The mother instinctively presses the child closer, her body acting as a shield. Around her, others stir. An older woman feeds more fuel into the flames. A hunter adjusts the entrance covering to block the draft. The cry of that infant has mobilized the entire community. Everyone understands what is at stake. The tribe does not measure success only in hunts or fires survived, but in whether the child wakes again at dawn, alive and warm. The fragility of infants also left its mark on prehistoric spirituality. Many early burial sites of children include red ochre beads or carved figurines, symbols perhaps meant to protect them in the afterlife. It suggests that parents believed the souls of their lost children mattered, that even short lives had meaning. These rituals reveal both grief and reverence. The tenderness invested in children was not a luxury, but a necessity. To treat the death of an infant lightly would mean to abandon the very essence of what held communities together. So, while the Ice Age world was dominated by mammoths, glaciers, and predators, the true measure of survival lay in the quiet corners of caves, in the arms of mothers, in the cries of newborns against the howling wind. Their fragility tested every skill, every resource, every bond that prehistoric humans possessed. To protect an infant was to resist the Ice Age itself, to declare that tomorrow would come. In the end, humanity's survival was tied to the survival of its smallest members. Their weakness forced us to be inventive, compassionate, and united. Without that fragility, Perhaps humans would not have learned the depth of cooperation or the power of love in the face of cold and hunger. The Ice Age threatened to extinguish those tiny flames, but our ancestors refused to let them go out. It is because they succeeded again and again that we are here to tell this story at all. When winter tightened its grip and the land froze under endless layers of snow, shelter became the difference between life and death. For prehistoric families, protecting infants in the bitter cold demanded more than fire and furs. It required places strong enough to withstand the howling winds, insulated enough to hold precious heat, and safe enough to keep predators at bay. The Ice Age landscape was vast and merciless, but scattered across it were havens, some carved by nature, others built by human hands. These shelters became wombs of survival, cradling both the fragile cries of babies and the fragile hopes of humanity. The most iconic and enduring of these shelters were caves. Carved by rivers, wind, and time, caves provided natural fortresses against the elements. Step inside and one could find respite from the screaming gales and swirling snow. A cave mouth, draped with animal hides or branches, transformed into a warm chamber where firelight flickered and shadows danced across stone walls. Within those walls, mothers pressed their babies close, elders tended fires, and hunters laid down their spears for the night. The steady warmth of the fire bounced off stone, creating a cocoon where life would continue despite the ice waiting just beyond. Yet caves were not always perfect sanctuaries. Some were damp, dripping with water from frozen rock. Others were occupied by dangerous beasts, cave bears, lions, hyenas, forcing humans to either fight for control or seek safety elsewhere. Many groups could not rely solely on caves. They had to adapt, to build, to create their own homes in a world where nature rarely offered enough. This necessity sparked one of the most remarkable feats of Ice Age ingenuity, the mammoth bone hut. Across the plains of Eastern Europe and Siberia, archaeologists have uncovered circular structures built from the massive bones of woolly mammoths. Rib bones arched together to form frames, skulls stacked to create walls, and tusks used as supports. These skeletal shelters were covered in thick hides, layered with earth or snow for insulation. To modern eyes, they appear eerie, homes built from the remains of giants. But to Ice Age families, they were fortresses of warmth, painstakingly constructed havens where firelight glowed and babies could survive the long, merciless nights. Picture the scene. Hunters dragging enormous bones across frozen ground, arranging them into a circular frame, while women stretch hides across the gaps. Inside, a fire is lit, smoke rising through a carefully crafted vent. The temperature outside may be 40 degrees below freezing, but within those bone and hide walls, warmth collects, kept in by layers of fur and earth. A baby swaddled in skins rests against its mother's chest, its tiny breasts forming clouds in the air. The howling winds beat against the walls, but the family inside remains safe, wrapped in the shelter they built with their own hands. Not all shelters were so monumental. On windswept plains where it was scarce and caves were distant, families improvised. They constructed small tents from reindeer hides, stretched across wooden poles scavenged from fallen trees or mammoth tusks. They dug pits into the ground, lining them with branches and grass, covering them with hides to trap heat. In snow-heavy regions, they built dome-shaped huts, not unlike igloos, where snow itself acted as insulation. These structures may have been temporary, but they provided critical protection during migrations or hunts. For babies, the difference between exposure and shelter was a difference between life and death. A night spent in the open could sap warmth faster than any fire could restore it. But inside a shelter with layers of furs piled thick and firelight flickering, a baby had a fighting chance. Mothers could nurse without fear of freezing winds cutting through their clothing. Fathers could sleep in shifts, knowing their children were safe from prowling predators. In every culture, across every region, the building of shelters was not just a task for survival. It was an act of protection, of love, of defiance against a world that seemed determined to snuff out the fragile light of humanity. The evidence of these shelters also tells us something deeper about prehistoric people. They were not simply brutes reacting to their environment. They were planners, architects, problem solvers. To build a mammoth bone hut required vision, cooperation, and shared knowledge. To transform a damp cave into a warm home demanded creativity. smoke control, fire management, the crafting of hide partitions. These acts of shelter-making reveal intelligence and foresight, qualities that were as important to survival as spears or fire. And always at the heart of these efforts lay the infant, the fragile child whose survival gave meaning to the struggle. Shelters also became spaces of community and memory. Within caves, families painted walls with ochre and charcoal, creating images of animals, hunts, and symbols. Some believe these paintings were spiritual, perhaps invoking protection or honoring the animals that sustained them. Others argue they were teaching tools, passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Whatever their purpose, the fact remains, these walls held not just warmth but stories. They cradled not only bodies but identities. And somewhere in a glow of firelight, babies gazed upward as shapes danced across stone, absorbing the earliest lessons of what it meant to be human. The contrasts of shelter life were stark. Outside, the cold could strip life away in hours. Inside, warmth lingered, fragile but real. Outside, predators prowled unseen in the dark. Inside, the fire's glow created a circle of safety. Outside, the wind howled with the promise of despair. Inside, mothers whispered lullabies, soft voices soothing restless infants to sleep. These dualities defined Ice Age existence, and shelters were the thin line between them. Archaeologists who uncover the remnants of these ancient homes often find traces of ordinary life preserved in ash, bone, and stone. Charwood from long-dead fires, flint flakes from tool-making, scraps of hide, and even footprints preserved in cave floors. Each trace is a whisper from the past, a reminder that within those spaces, families lived, dreamed, feared, and loved. And at the center of it all were babies, wrapped tightly in furs, shielded from the storm, their survival shaping the destiny of humanity. In the end, shelters were more than walls against the cold. They were symbols of resilience, testaments to the ingenuity of people who refused to yield to the ice. They were cradles of survival, where the youngest were given a chance to grow, where mothers and fathers proved that love could build fortresses stronger than stone. From the dark caverns of Europe to the bone huts of Siberia, these shelters stand as silent witnesses to the courage of those who came before us. Without them, the cry of the infant in the frozen night would have been silenced forever. Fire was not just a discovery, it was salvation. For prehistoric families enduring Ice Age winters, fire became the fragile thread connecting survival to extinction. In a world where snow fell endlessly and winds cut like blades, flames offered warmth, protection, light, and the possibility of life itself. For the infants born into this frozen wilderness, fire was more than a comfort. It was their lifeline, a shield between fragile lungs and the cold air waiting to claim them. Imagine a landscape, an endless expanse of white stretching toward the horizon, trees bending beneath the weight of ice, rivers locked in silence beneath frozen sheets. The temperature plunged so low that even a few moments without shelter could numb fingers, toes, and breath. In such a world, how could a newborn, naked, helpless, and utterly dependent survive? The answer flickered in orange and gold, crackling in the heart of the night. To make fire was not easy. It was a skill learned, remembered, and passed down, guarded with as much care as food or weapons. Sparks were struck from flint against pyrite, or created by twisting wood with bow drills until friction coaxed an ember to life. That ember, no bigger than a grain of rice, became the most precious thing a family could hold. Mothers and fathers leaned close, breathless, feeding it with dried grass, twigs, and moss until flame leapt upward, fragile but fierce. For the infant bundled in furs nearby, the birth of fire was as important as its own first breath. Once flames took hold, fire became the center of life. Families gathered in circles around it, shielding their babies from drafts and pressing them close to the heat. Fire turned cold caves into homes, bone huts into sanctuaries. Its warmth penetrated layers of fur and hide, ensuring that tiny bodies did not shiver into silence during the night. It dried wet clothes, hardened tools, and sterilized water. But above all, it ensured that the smallest and weakest of the group, the babies, could survive. At night, when predators prowled and darkness pressed heavy against cave mouths, fire also became a protector. The glow of flames cast shadows that frightened away wolves and cave lions. The crackle of burning created a barrier of sound that made humans feel less alone in the vast silence of the Ice Age. For parents, it meant they could rest in shifts, secure that their infants were not entirely defenseless. To leave a baby unprotected in the night was to risk everything, but fire turned the unknown darkness into a circle of light where life could endure. For infants, fire was more than warmth. It was also a source of food security. Mothers who nursed needed warmth to maintain their health, and fire allowed food to be cooked, making it easier to digest and safer to eat. Roasted meats released more calories than raw flesh. Soups warmed the body from within, and fat-rich stews provided the energy needed to produce milk. Every spark fed not just the flames, but the very cycle of survival, ensuring that babies grew strong enough to face the cold days ahead. Keeping fire alive was an unending responsibility. Families treated their flames like living beings, never allowing them to die completely. Before moving camps, they carried embers carefully wrapped in moss or bark, protected from the wind. Children were taught to guard the fire as soon as they were old enough, learning to feed it with sticks and coax it back to strength. For a baby, sleeping near a dying fire meant danger, as the night's chill crept in without mercy. But for a family that carried their fire faithfully, the flames endured, as constant as the beating of a heart. Archaeological evidence shows that hearths were carefully maintained. Charcoal and ash deposits in caves reveal repeated burning in the same spots over generations. Stones were sometimes arranged to contain the flames, preventing sparks from spreading and directing heat where it was most needed. Around these hearths, bones were cracked from marrow, tools were shaped, and stories were told. And always, in the warmest place closest to fire, babies were laid to rest. The presence of fire also shaped the rhythm of life. Days were dictated not only by the rising and setting sun, but by the feeding of flames. At dawn, families stirred the coals back to life, ensuring warmth for the new day. At dusk, fires grew larger, flames leaping high to push back the darkness. Babies swaddled in layers of skin and fur, which sleep to the sound of crackling wood. Their earliest lullaby not sung by a mother, but whispered by the fire itself. Yet fire carried danger, too. A stray ember could ignite hides, and smoke filled enclosed shelters if not carefully vented. Families had to balance the blessing of fire with its risks. Mothers held their babies away from sparks, and fathers cut small openings in hides to allow smoke to escape. In their constant vigilance, prehistoric people developed a relationship with fire not control, but of respect. It was never taken for granted. It was honored, cherished, and feared. Fire also became a force of connection beyond survival. It was a place where families gathered, where communities formed, where stories were told and knowledge was passed. Around the flames, parents shared tales of the hunt, taught older children to carve tools, and sang lullabies to soothe restless babies. Firelight illuminated painted walls, transforming caves into classrooms and temples. For infants, these early experiences imprinted not only warmth but culture, identity, and the beginnings of human memory. One can imagine a mother cradling her baby near the flames, singing softly as sparks floated upward into the dark. The baby's small hands reached toward the glow, mesmerized by the dance of light. These moments, repeated countless times across countless generations, bound humanity to fire in ways deeper than utility. It became part of our very sense of home, of safety, of belonging. In the frozen nights of the Ice Age, when the wind shrieked and snow piled high against the entrances of shelters, fire remained constant. It transformed unbearable conditions into survivable ones. It nurtured infants who would otherwise perish. It allowed humanity to endure not just physically but spiritually, giving warmth to bodies and light to souls. Without fire, the story of human survival in the Ice Age would be a story cut short. With fire, it became a saga of endurance, hope, and continuity. For babies, every spark was a shield, every flame a promise. Wrapped in furs, sleeping near their mothers, they survived because fire survived. In that fragile balance, embers glowing in the dark, small breaths rising the cold, lay the miracle of human survival. Fire was not only the lifeline of the infant, but the lifeline of humanity itself. In the relentless cold of the Ice Age, survival demanded creativity, and nowhere was this more evident than in how prehistoric families dressed their most fragile members. Infants, unable to regulate their own body temperature, required more than just blankets or fire. They needed clothing designed to trap warmth, shield from wind, and protect from the harsh elements. From the earliest swaddles of moss and grasses to the sophisticated layering of animal furs, the first baby clothes became both a practical tool of survival and profound expression of care. Imagine a mother sitting in the flickering light of a cave hearth, her infant cradled against her chest. She wraps the baby tightly in soft layers of reindeer fur, stretching each piece to cover the tiny hands and feet. Beneath the furs, moss or dried grasses add insulation, absorbing moisture and retaining heat. Every fold is deliberate, every layer placed to preserve life. The baby stirs, small breasts puffing against the fabric, and the mother adjusts a corner to ensure warmth reaches the nose and fingertips. This was not merely clothing. It was a life-saving ritual repeated countless times across the frozen landscapes of the Ice Age. The materials used were scavenged from the very animals that also provided food and tools. Skins were tanned carefully, removing hair only when necessary, and then sewn with sinew or plant fibers to create functional wraps. Some skins were left soft and supple for newborns, while others were layered thickly for older children learning to crawl or walk in the snow. Moss, grasses, and lichens were woven or stuffed between layers to provide cushioning and insulation. Even the process of crafting these garments reflected an acute understanding of the environment. Furs with thick undercoats trapped heat, while lighter skins allowed breathability, preventing overheating near the fire. Carrying infants also became a form of clothing in itself. Mothers often held their babies close to their bodies, pressed against the chest or back, allowing their own warmth to become the first layer of protection. These early methods of swaddling and skin-to-skin contact were critical. A baby wrapped in furs but separated from a warm body could still succumb to frostbite or hypothermia. Close contact ensured that the infant's heartbeat, breath, and warmth were amplified by the mother's own body. In essence, the caregiver and the baby became a single unit of survival. The function of these early clothes extended beyond mere warmth. They provided mobility, allowing mothers to hunt, gather, or tend fires without leaving infants exposed. They offered protection from insects, abrasive terrain, and predators small and large. And they reinforced social bonds. Just as adults fashioned clothing to signify group identity or status, wrapping an infant in furs indicated the community's commitment to that child. The smallest member was recognized, cared for, and protected, not just by instinct, but by deliberate, intelligent effort. The archaeological record supports this ingenuity. Remnants of infant clothing have been discovered in frozen and dry sites across Europe and Asia. Tiny fur fragments, perforated bones likely used as sewing needles, and imprints of textiles and clay reveal that prehistoric humans invested significant time in crafting wearable protection for infants. Even without written language, these artifacts tell a story. Babies were treasured, and survival depended on careful preparation and attention to detail. Consider the environment in which these garments were used. Blizzards could arrive without warning. Winds could pierce shelters, and the temperature could drop far below freezing within hours. A baby swaddled in soft furs, pressed against a mother's chest, was shielded from the worst of these extremes. Older children, wrapped in layered hides, could accompany hunting parties or travel across snow-covered plains, their clothing serving as portable insulation. These garments transformed vulnerability into resilience, turning infants from passive victims of the cold into participants in the survival of their families. The act of dressing a baby was also intimate and repetitive, a daily ritual that reinforced emotional bonds. Every fold, every layer, every careful adjustment required attention, patience, and tenderness. Parents learned to read the subtle signals of discomfort or chill in their infants, responding with warmth, touch, and extra layers. In the stillness of the night, the simple act of wrapping a child in fur became a ceremony of protection, a silent promise. You will survive, and we will see you through this frozen world. Fire, shelters, and clothing were deeply interconnected. A baby wrapped in furs could be placed safely near the hearth, absorbing heat without risk of burns. Furs prevented heat loss while the mother tended to fire or cooked food. Clothing, in combination with physical contact and environmental adaptation, represented a multi-layered survival strategy. Each layer had a purpose, each action a meaning. Without these precautions, the fragile life of an infant would have been extinguished in the night, a victim of the Ice Age's relentless cruelty. Even today, echoes of these first garments remain. Swaddling practices, the use of layered clothing for newborns, and the concept of carrying babies close to the body have persisted across millennia. They are a testament to the ingenuity and compassion of prehistoric parents, who understood that survival was never just about food, fire, or shelter. It was also about care, protection, and warmth. In the end, the first baby clothes were more than fabric and fur. They were symbols of ingenuity, love, and vigilance. Each wrap, each layer, each carefully prepared bundle represented a commitment to life in a world that threatened it at every turn. Wrapped in these early garments, infants became more than fragile creatures. They became the future of humanity, safeguarded against the merciless cold, cradled in the arms of innovation, and protected by the first conscious acts of parental care. Survival in the Ice Age was never a passive act. Every day demanded relentless effort to secure the most basic requirement: food. For infants whose bodies were delicate and rapidly growing, and for mothers whose health determined the ability to produce nourishing milk, the stakes were unimaginably high. Hunger was not just discomfort, it was life or death. In the frozen expanses of the Ice Age, every bite mattered, and every meal was a carefully calculated strategy to ensure the smallest members of society could endure. Infant nutrition began with the mother. Breastfeeding was critical, providing a perfect balance of calories, antibodies, and hydration. But for mothers to produce sufficient milk, they themselves needed abundant, high-energy food. Hunting, gathering, and scavenging were daily imperatives, and families relied on the entire tribe to ensure the nutritional needs of mothers and infants were met. Fat, protein, and minerals were paramount. In a landscape dominated by ice and snow, plant foods were scarce in winter months. So animal resources became the lifeline of survival. Meat, marrow, and fat were prioritized not only for adults but for the nursing mothers whose children depended on them. Imagine a small hunting party returning from the plains. A reindeer carcass has been brought down, the group working together to carry it back to camp. Bones are broken from marrow, which is rich in calories and easy to digest. Fatty sections are saved for mothers, sometimes mixed with melted snow to create a warm, nourishing stew. Even the smallest scraps of meat are distributed carefully. No part of the animal is wasted, because every morsel represents not just energy, but the chance that an infant will survive another night of freezing temperatures. In addition to meat and fat, mothers and infants benefited from other calorie-dense resources. Nuts, seeds, and any remaining tubers were collected and stored for winter use. Honey, when available, provided concentrated energy. Eggs from birds, small game, and fish were all incorporated into the diet when possible. Prehistoric people quickly learned which foods were safe and which were not, combining available resources to ensure survival. Knowledge of seasonal availability, plant toxicity, and preparation techniques became critical. The line between nourishment and poison could be razor thin, particularly for vulnerable infants. The preparation of food was an art in itself. Cooking over fire not only made foods digestible, but also killed harmful bacteria, a key factor for fragile digestive systems of infants. Meats were roasted, stews were simmered, and bones were cracked for marrow. For mothers, these meals restored energy for nursing, while infants often received softened or mashed foods once they were old enough to eat solids. The communal aspect of food preparation meant that the well-being of every child was a shared responsibility. While one person tended the fire, another ground seeds or shredded meat, ensuring that the nutritional chain was unbroken. Hydration was equally vital. Snow could be melted for water, but boiling it over fire was often necessary to remove impurities. For infants, clean water was a matter of life and death, as even minor illnesses caused by contaminated water could be fatal. The careful handling of liquid, like the meticulous preparation of food, demonstrates that prehistoric families approached infant care with intelligence, vigilance, and a deep understanding of their environment. Scarcity demanded innovation. During particularly harsh winters, families relied on stored caches of dried meat, fish, and nuts. These primitive pantries ensured that even during periods when hunting was impossible, mothers and infants could be sustained. Ice Age communities developed strategies for long-term storage. often using frozen ground as natural refrigeration. Fat, especially from mammoth or reindeer, could be preserved and rationed for maximum effect. Every stored resource was an investment in the survival of the next generation. The contrast between abundance and scarcity was never more acute than in these winter months. When hunting succeeded, the camp was filled with warmth and hope. Mothers could nurse with ease, babies grew stronger, and the community celebrated its resilience. When hunting failed, tension and fear rose. Infants were most at risk, and adults faced impossible choices. Ration carefully, travel farther to hunt, or improvise with the limited plant foods available. The pressure of the Ice Age created an environment where every decision carried profound consequences. Yet communities adapted, innovated, and survived. Even beyond nutrition, food played a role in emotional survival. The act of feeding infants and mothers became a ritual of care, wrapping a baby in furs, offering a warm meal to the mother, and ensuring that each child received enough milk were daily affirmations of love and attention. In the harshest of conditions, these small acts became lifelines, reinforcing bonds between parent and child and between family members. Survival was not only a physical challenge, but an emotional one, requiring patience, empathy, and constant vigilance. Archaeological evidence provides a vivid record of these strategies. Sites across Europe reveal hearths surrounded by animal bones, stone tools for cutting and grinding, and storage pits for nuts and dried meats. Fatty residues on ancient cooking vessels show that high-calorie foods were a priority. In some locations, the remains of weaning foods for infants have been found, often mashed or cooked to improve digestibility. These findings illustrate that prehistoric communities invested extraordinary care into feeding the next generation, understanding instinctively that the survival of infants was essential for the survival of the tribe itself. The story of food in the Ice Age is therefore a story of adaptation, intelligence, and resilience. It is a narrative of how human beings, confronted by freezing landscapes, predators, and scarcity, developed systems to ensure that even the youngest and most vulnerable could survive. Every meal, every portion, every carefully cooked morsel was a battle against death and an act of hope. Infants, dependent on their mothers in the community, became central to this struggle, their survival a reflection of human ingenuity and cooperation. In the frozen nights of the Ice Age, food was not simply sustenance. It was protection, warmth, and love. Every hunting success, every preserved marrow, every carefully prepared meal represented a triumph against the environment. For babies and mothers alike, these meals made the difference between survival and tragedy. They reinforced the central truth of the Ice Age. Humanity endured not just because of tools, fire, or shelter, but because of the relentless care invested in each other, particularly in the smallest, most fragile members of the community. In the frozen expanses of the Ice Age, survival was a constant negotiation between humans and the harsh environment. Every hunt, every gathered resource, every step taken across snow-covered plains could mean the difference between life and death, especially for infants who depended entirely on the energy and foresight of adults. Prehistoric people did not simply wander aimlessly. They developed intricate strategies to locate, track, and procure food, ensuring that even in the dead of winter, their most vulnerable members could endure. The cornerstone of winter survival was hunting large game. Herds of mammoths, reindeer, bison, and horses provided an abundance of calories and fat, crucial for mothers and infants. But these animals were not easy prey. Prehistoric hunters relied on a combination of observation, planning, and cooperation. Tracking involved reading subtle signs in the snow, footprints, broken branches, droppings, and feeding patterns. Hunters needed to anticipate the movement of herds, often following them for days across icy plains, through frozen rivers, and over treacherous ridges. The success of a hunt was never guaranteed, and the cost of failure was high. A single missed opportunity could result in a night of empty stomachs for the youngest and weakest. Cooperation was essential. Hunting large mammals required teamwork on an unprecedented scale. Groups coordinated attacks, using spears tipped with stone or bone, pits hidden in the snow, and traps fashioned from wood and ice. Experienced hunters taught younger members how to drive animals toward kill zones, while others kept watch for predators. Mothers and caregivers, though often not directly involved in the hunt, contributed by preparing hides, storing food, and tending to infants. In this delicate ecosystem of effort and skill, the survival of the tiniest depended on the collective success of the group. Hunting was not only about the kill, it was also about post-hunt management. Once an animal was downed, it was meticulously processed. Meat was portioned for immediate consumption. Fat was rendered for high-energy meals. Bones were cracked for marrow, and hides were preserved for clothing and shelter. Nothing was wasted. Even entrails could be used for tools or nutrition. Infants, too small to consume solid foods, benefited indirectly. The richness of maternal milk relied on these nutrient-dense resources. The well-being of a newborn often depended on the skill and diligence of hunters, who risked frostbite, exhaustion, and injury to secure these vital stores. Yet hunting alone could not sustain communities through the winter. Plant resources, though scarce in cold months, were equally vital. Roots, nuts, seeds, and preserved fruits provided essential vitamins and minerals. Families developed knowledge of which plants could survive freezing temperatures and how to store them for later use. Berries, for example, were dried or frozen in advance, offering concentrated nutrition when other food was unavailable. Underground tubers were dug carefully, sometimes using tools to extract them from frozen soil. This combination of hunting and gathering ensured a balanced diet and mitigated the risk of relying entirely on unpredictable game. Innovation also played a critical role in winter strategies. Prehistoric people created tools and methods specifically for cold weather hunting. Throwing spears, atlatls, and later, bows allowed them to strike prey from a distance, reducing the risk of injury in icy conditions. Snow and ice were incorporated into traps and shelters to funnel animals into controlled zones. Smoke from fires was sometimes used to herd animals or keep them away from settlements. These techniques demonstrate not only intelligence, but an intimate understanding of the landscape, animal behavior, and seasonal cycles. Every innovation increased the chances that mothers and infants would survive another freezing night. Mobility was another key factor. Some groups were nomadic, following herds across vast territories to find food, while others settled in resource-rich areas during the harshest months. Migration required careful planning. Babies had to be transported safely, furs and bedding protected, and sufficient food stored for the journey. Traveling in winter demanded endurance, coordination, and foresight. For infants, these migrations were dangerous yet essential. They were bundled in multiple layers of furs, often carried on the backs or chests of parents, shielded from wind and snow. Each step was measured, each movement calculated to maximize safety while minimizing exposure to freezing temperatures. Predators added yet another layer of complexity. Wolves, cave lions, and bears were drawn to both humans and the animals they hunted. Communities developed strategies to defend themselves. Fires were kept burning, shelters were reinforced, and hunting parties coordinated movements to reduce risk. Infants were never left unprotected. They were swaddled in furs and often surrounded by adults during hunting trips or nighttime watches. The constant threat of predators underscored the precariousness of life and the importance of skill, cooperation, and vigilance. Communication and knowledge transfer were vital to survival. Elders taught younger members the intricacies of tracking, the best hunting grounds, and the behaviors of prey. Lessons were passed down through demonstration, storytelling, and hands-on practice. Children observed, memorized, and eventually participated, learning the critical skills that would one day allow them to support the next generation. Infants, though entirely dependent, were the focus of this educational continuum. Their future survival depended on the accurate transmission of these strategies. The seasonal rhythm of the Ice Age dictated all actions. In early winter, groups focused on storing food and preparing shelters, ensuring that the coldest months could be endured. Midwinter hunts were perilous but necessary, providing fresh meat and fat. Late winter, as snow began to melt, allowed for gathering of spring roots and preparation for migration or planting. This cyclical approach required foresight and discipline, qualities that ensured the survival of infants and the community at large. Every aspect of hunting and gathering in the winter was underscored by contrast: life versus death, warmth versus cold, abundance versus scarcity. A successful hunt brought not only food but hope, strengthening the bonds within the community and ensuring that babies could thrive. Failure brought fear, highlighting the fragility of life in a frozen world. Each strategy, each carefully executed plan, represented humanity's defiance against the relentless cruelty of the Ice Age. The archaeological record confirms the sophistication of these strategies. Remains of spear points, hunting traps, and organized kill sites indicate a high degree of planning and cooperation. Storage pits for nuts and seeds, evidence of preserved meat and fat, and even remnants of infant weaning foods reveal that prehistoric people invested extraordinary effort in sustaining life. These insights highlight that winter survival was a carefully orchestrated endeavor designed to protect the weakest members first and foremost. In the frozen nights, when snowstorms rage and winds threaten to carry life away, it was the ingenuity of hunting and gathering that allowed infants to survive. Each successful hunt, each preserved tuber, each collaborative effort reinforced a central truth. The survival of the community depended on protecting its most vulnerable. Hunters, gatherers, and caregivers were bound together in this relentless struggle, and the smallest cries of babies in the night became both a challenge and a motivation to endure, adapt, and innovate. Winter survival was not a solitary endeavor. It was a web of intelligence, cooperation, and relentless effort. And at the center of it all, the infants were protected, nourished, and given a chance to live. Without these strategies, the fragile spark of life in the Ice Age would have been extinguished countless times. Through hunting, gathering, and careful planning, humanity carved warmth, food, and hope from a frozen world, ensuring that the youngest members could not only survive but thrive. Survival in the Ice Age was as much about ingenuity as it was about endurance. Beyond fire, clothing, and shelters, prehistoric humans relied on tools and technology to transform an unforgiving landscape into a livable one. In winter, these implements became extensions of the body, allowing families to hunt, build, gather, and protect their most vulnerable members, especially infants. Every sharp edge, every carefully crafted implement, and every innovation in materials represented an intimate understanding of the cold, the terrain, and the demands of life itself. Stone was a cornerstone of prehistoric technology. Flint, obsidian, and chert were chipped into sharp points and blades for hunting and cutting. Spears and projectile points, often hafted to wooden shafts with sinew, allowed hunters to strike from a distance, reducing risk in icy conditions. Knives and scrapers were used to process hides for clothing and shelter, transforming raw animal skins into warm, durable layers. Each tool was a product of careful design and skill, created to perform a specific function that could mean life or death in the freezing landscape. Bone and antler were equally crucial. Long, strong bones became handles for tools, points for spears, and hooks for traps. Antlers were shaped into digging implements for roots and tubers hidden beneath frozen soil. The smallest of these innovations, such as needles made from thin bone, enabled the sewing of infant furs and the creation of swaddling wraps. These tiny tools, often overlooked, were critical for maintaining warmth and survival, showing that technological sophistication was not only about hunting, but about care and protection for the next generation. Fire-related technology also evolved in tandem with winter survival needs. Containers carved from bone, wood, or stone allowed food to be cooked more efficiently in water to be boiled for safety. Hearthstones were arranged to contain flames, preventing accidents and maximizing heat. Smoke vents were carefully designed in shelters to reduce respiratory hazards for infants while maintaining warmth. Even simple additions, such as digging shallow pits for fire, reflect an awareness of both safety and effectiveness. Fire was not merely warmth. It was a system, and technology amplified its life-saving potential. Prehistoric humans also innovated in the realm of transportation. Sledges made from wood, sometimes reinforced with bone, allowed groups to carry meat, firewood, and infants across snow-covered terrain. Animal skins were used as sled covers to protect fragile items from moisture and cold. This combination of tools, materials, and foresight enabled mobility even in harsh winter conditions, ensuring that essential resources and the youngest members of the group could be moved safely across the landscape. Traps and hunting technologies were especially crucial in winter, when large game might be scarce and small animals became more important for sustenance. Pit traps, snares, and nets made from sinew or plant fibers were strategically placed along known animal paths. These devices required patience, planning, and knowledge of animal behavior. Capturing smaller prey, could supplement the diet of mothers and infants, providing essential fats, proteins, and nutrients when larger hunts failed. The development of these technologies demonstrates the sophisticated understanding prehistoric humans had of their ecosystem and how they leveraged it to maximize survival in extreme conditions. Another remarkable innovation was insulation technology. Scrapers and awls enabled the precise preparation of hides, removing hair or thinning layers where necessary. Furs were stitched together to create multi-layered clothing, bedding, and swaddling wraps for infants. Even floors of shelters were lined with layers of grasses and hides to trap heat. These technologies turned raw materials into highly effective life support systems. Without these innovations, the fire inside a cave or hut would be insufficient to protect a fragile newborn from hypothermia. Ice Age technology also fostered communal survival. Tool making was not a solitary endeavor. Knowledge was shared, skills were taught, and the next generation was trained in the craft. Elders demonstrated how to chip stone without breaking it, how to shape bone without splintering it, and how to combine materials effectively. Infants and young children were often close observers, learning the patterns, methods, and rituals associated with tool production. The very act of creating tools became a thread connecting generations, with technology intertwined with family survival and culture. Adaptation was key. Tools were constantly refined in response to changing conditions. A spear that worked in early winter hunts might be modified for late-season hunting. Scrapers and needles were adjusted for thicker furs as temperatures dropped. Even the design of shelters evolved with the integration of new materials and techniques, from layered hides to reinforced bone frameworks. This continuous innovation ensured that survival strategies were not static but dynamic, responsive to the environment, and focused on protecting the most vulnerable members of the group. The archaeological record bears witness to this technological sophistication. Sites across Europe, Asia, and North America reveal an astonishing array of implements, from flint points and bone needles to sledges and fire pits. Tiny traces of sewing, cut marks on hides, and remnants of composite tools show that prehistoric humans were not merely surviving. They were engineering solutions to the most extreme challenges. Each artifact, no matter how small, represents a life-saving innovation, often directly linked to protection and care of infants. Technology also provided psychological comfort. The ability to manipulate the environment, to build, hunt, and secure resources gave families a sense of control against the unpredictable forces of winter. Infants, though helpless, were cradled within this web of innovation, insulated and protected by the combined efforts of caregivers, hunters, and toolmakers. The tools themselves became symbols of hope and continuity, ensuring that life could persist in a world that constantly threatened it. In the end, the tools and technologies of the Ice Age were more than instruments. They were lifelines. Spears, knives, scrapers, needles, sledges, and traps all worked together to create a network of protection. They amplified human ingenuity, strengthened communities, and safeguarded the most vulnerable. For infants, these technologies were invisible shields, ensuring that fragile bodies could endure freezing nights, scarce food, and relentless environmental challenges. Through innovation, prehistoric humans transformed the raw materials of the world into instruments of survival, leaving a legacy of resilience, creativity, and care that echoes through millennia. Survival in the Ice Age was never a solitary endeavor. Harsh winters, relentless predators, and scarce resources created a world where cooperation was not optional. It was essential. Among the most vulnerable were infants, entirely dependent on adults for warmth, food, and protection. The success of child rearing in such conditions relied on the formation of tight-knit social bonds, shared responsibilities, and rituals that ensured the survival of the next generation. Families and communities functioned as integrated units, each member contributing to the protection and nurturing of the youngest. Imagine a frozen night in a cave. A mother cradles her newborn, swaddled in furs, while an elder tends a fire, and older children huddle nearby, learning the rhythms of daily survival. Fathers or other caregivers return from hunting, bringing meat and fat that will nourish both adults and infants. The group moves in synchrony, feeding, warming, comforting, and educating. This division of labor ensured that no child was left vulnerable and that every member's strengths were harnessed for the common good. The survival of the smallest became a shared priority, illustrating the deep interdependence that defined Ice Age communities. Child rearing extended beyond the mother-infant dyad. Grandparents, siblings, and extended family all played vital roles. Elders provided wisdom and guidance, teaching younger adults how to prepare food, tend fires, and craft essential tools. Older children assisted with gathering materials, carrying infants during travel, and helping in the preparation of furs and clothing. The collective effort reduced the burden on any one caregiver and created a resilient support network. For infants, this network was life-saving. Their needs could be met continuously, even when mothers were occupied with other survival tasks. Attachment and physical closeness were key strategies for infant survival. Mothers held babies close to their bodies to preserve warmth, sometimes for hours on end, while performing other essential tasks. Carriers made from hides, fur-lined slings, or simple wraps allowed infants to be transported safely across frozen landscapes. Physical contact provided more than warmth. It regulated infant heart rates, reduced stress, and strengthened the emotional bond between caregiver and child. These practices demonstrate that Ice Age parenting was informed not only by instinct, but by a sophisticated understanding of infant needs and human psychology. The communal approach also extended to teaching and socialization. Even in early infancy, babies were exposed to the rhythms and sounds of daily life. The crackle of fire, the chatter of adults, the preparation of food, and the cadence of hunting rituals. Such exposure laid the foundation for learning essential survival skills later in life. By observing interactions, infants absorbed social norms, hierarchies, and the patterns of cooperation that would later allow them to function effectively within their community. Survival was not only a physical challenge, but a social and cognitive one, beginning from the very first days of life. Rituals and symbolic practices were intertwined with child rearing. Archaeological evidence suggests that Ice Age communities marked the births and lives of children through cave art, burial practices, and possibly protective charms. Infants may have been swaddled with objects or painted with natural pigments, intended to invoke protection or ensure health. While these practices were practical in function, furs, wrappings, and insulation, they also held psychological and cultural significance, creating a sense of belonging and reinforcing the value of life in an unforgiving environment. Infant mortality remained high, but the presence of social bonds dramatically improved survival rates. Communities that share responsibilities, knowledge, and resources were better able to protect the most vulnerable. In contrast, isolated groups face higher risks, emphasizing the evolutionary advantage of cooperation. Humans, even in the Ice Age, were fundamentally social beings, and the protection of infants was central to the continuation of both the family unit and the species itself. Conflict and resource competition existed, but the survival of infants often acted as a unifying force. Even during scarcity, adults prioritized the needs of mothers and children. Rationing, rotation of tasks, and coordinated hunting ensured that infants received milk and warmth, even if adults went hungry for a short period. This prioritization highlights the extraordinary lengths to which Ice Age communities want to safeguard their youngest members, reinforcing the idea that survival was a communal effort rather than an individual one. Mobility influenced social structures as well. Nomadic groups needed to transport infants safely across frozen plains or river crossings, requiring collective strategies and cooperation. Adults coordinated movements, shared carrying responsibilities, and designed portable shelters that could be assembled quickly. The smallest members were literally at the center of the group, both physically and strategically. Their survival dictated the pace, route, and resource management of the entire community. Infants were thus integrated into every aspect of social organization, shaping the behavior and priorities of adults around them. The emotional dimension of child rearing in these communities cannot be underestimated. While survival demanded practical strategies, love, attention, and emotional engagement were equally vital. Rock art, music, and lullabies suggest that adults sought to comfort and stimulate infants, creating safe and nurturing spaces despite external hardships. The act of holding, singing, or wrapping a child in furs was both a practical and deeply emotional gesture, fostering attachment that would have long-term benefits for development and resilience. Archaeological findings provide insight into these dynamics. Traces of communal shelters, share hearths, and layered furs indicate coordinated care for children. Burial sites reveal that infants were often interred with objects, implying recognition of their value and a sense of reverence. These practices reflect a sophisticated understanding of both the physical and emotional needs of the youngest members of society. Communities invested extraordinary effort to ensure that infants not only survived, but were cared for in ways that promoted health, learning, and social integration. Ultimately, social bonds were as critical as fire, food, and shelter. In the Ice Age, the survival of infants depended on an intricate web of cooperation, knowledge transfer, and shared responsibility. Every member of the community played a role, from hunting and gathering to crafting clothing, tending fires, and offering comfort. These social networks ensured continuity of life, reinforced cultural practices, and provided the structure necessary for humanity to endure in an unforgiving world. In a frozen cave or a mammoth bone hut, the smallest cries of infants were not merely noises. They were calls that directed the attention, energy, and ingenuity of an entire group. Through these bonds, Ice Age humans created an environment where infants could survive, grow, and one day inherit the skills, knowledge, and resilience necessary to continue the species. Social bonds and child-rearing practices were therefore not ancillary. They were central to the story of human endurance, illustrating that even in the harshest climates, love, care, and cooperation were essential tools of survival. Surviving the Ice Age was not only a battle against the cold, hunger, and predators. It was also a fight against injury, illness, and infection. Infants, with their delicate immune systems and fragile bodies, were particularly vulnerable. Prehistoric humans, though lacking modern medicine, developed remarkable strategies to care for their youngest members. From the use of medicinal plants to practical hygiene and ritualized care, Ice Age communities applied knowledge born from observation, experience, and necessity to protect infants from the perils of the frozen world. Imagine a mother tending to her baby, wrapped in furs, near a flickering hearth. The infant coughs, a warning that the cold has penetrated the body or that an illness is taking hold. The mother applies a poultice made from crushed herbs, moss, or tree bark, substances she knows can reduce fever or soothe discomfort. These remedies, passed down from elder women and men, may not have cured all ailments, but they alleviated suffering and, in some cases, prevented death. Survival depended on keen observation, recognizing early signs of distress, understanding which plants were safe, and applying treatments swiftly and carefully. Herbal knowledge was central to infant care. Plants with antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, or soothing properties were harvested and prepared in various ways. Leaves might be crushed and applied to wounds, teas brewed to aid digestion, and smokes used to repel insects. Willow bark, rich in natural salicylates, may have provided primitive pain relief, while certain roots and berries offered nutrients that supported recovery. Mothers and caregivers learned these techniques through trial and error, building an oral tradition of practical medicine that became essential for infant survival. Hygiene, though rudimentary, was another critical component. Babies were kept clean to prevent infections, especially during winter months when wounds and skin irritations could worsen in cold, damp conditions. Furs and moss used for bedding and swaddling were replaced regularly, and soil materials were disposed of or moved away from sleeping areas. Water from melted snow or clean streams was used to wash infants, and caregivers understood that even small steps in cleanliness could mean the difference between life and death in a harsh environment. Treatment of injuries also required ingenuity. Small cuts or scrapes could quickly become life-threatening if infected. Caregivers applied pressure, bandaged wounds with plant fibers or strips of hide, and monitored for signs of infection. Broken bones, though difficult to treat, were stabilized using splints made from wood or bone, held in place with sinew. Such interventions may seem primitive to us today, but they represent deliberate, knowledgeable actions designed to preserve life in a world without hospitals or modern medicine. The role of fire extended to healthcare as well. Heat was used to sterilize tools, boil water, or prepare medicinal decoctions. Warmth also supported the infant's own body, aiding in recovery from illness. Being close to the hearth ensured that vulnerable babies maintained core body temperature, which was essential for immune function. Fire, combined with careful attention to hygiene and herbal remedies, created a multi-layered approach to infant care that increased survival rates even in freezing conditions. Community knowledge played a central role. Elders often acted as healers, combining practical treatments with ritualistic care. Certain ceremonies may have been performed to protect infants from perceived spiritual dangers or to promote health. While the exact nature of these rituals is largely lost to history, archaeological evidence, including the careful placement of plants, pigments, and objects near infant burials, suggests that Ice Age humans recognized the importance of combining physical care with psychological and spiritual reassurance. Such practices reinforced social bonds and demonstrated a holistic understanding of health. Nutrition also intersected with medicine. Mothers' diets directly affected the quality of breast milk, which provided antibodies and essential nutrients to infants. Caregivers ensured that mothers consumed high-energy, fat-rich foods and continued to receive adequate hydration, thereby indirectly fortifying infants against illness. Even the timing and preparation of weaning foods were carefully managed, introducing small amounts of soft, cooked, or mashed foods to complement milk, while minimizing the risk of digestive upset. Food was thus both nourishment and medicine, sustaining life in multiple ways. Protection against environmental hazards was another form of medical care. Infants were shielded from wind, frost, and predators through layered clothing, furs, and careful placement near fires. Shelters were designed to maintain warmth while allowing ventilation, and infants were never left unattended in dangerous conditions. These preventive measures, though simple in concept, were highly effective. Anticipating threats and taking proactive steps to mitigate them reflects a sophisticated understanding of risk management in infant care, long before formal medical knowledge existed. Observational skills were paramount. Caregivers monitored temperature, breathing, and behavior, noting subtle changes that could indicate illness or discomfort. These observations were shared within the community, creating a network of knowledge about infant health. Over generations, this accumulated wisdom formed the foundation of Ice Age medicine, combining empirical knowledge with cultural practices to maximize survival. Archaeological findings provide glimpses of these medical practices. Sites reveal remnants of medicinal plants, impressions of poultices, and careful arrangements of infant burials suggesting intentional care. Evidence of healed fractures or treated wounds indicates that prehistoric humans actively intervened to preserve life. Each artifact, from a simple plant fragment to a crafted splint, speaks to the ingenuity and dedication invested in protecting the youngest members of the community. Ultimately, Ice Age medicine for infants was not a separate system. It was integrated into daily life. Feeding, clothing, shelter, and social interaction were all part of a holistic strategy to promote health and survival. Caregivers combined knowledge, observation, skill, and compassion to create an environment where infants could endure even the harshest winters. In a world without formal medical institutions, these strategies exemplified the remarkable adaptability and resourcefulness of prehistoric humans. In the frozen landscape, where every hour could bring new threats, Ice Age medicine and infant care represented a delicate balance of knowledge, observation, and practical action. Herbs soothed, furs insulated, fires warmed, and communities watched over the vulnerable. Together, these strategies formed a protective network, ensuring that the smallest, most fragile members of society could survive, grow, and eventually inherit the wisdom and resilience necessary to continue the human story. In the unforgiving cold of the Ice Age, shelter was more than a place to sleep. It was a lifeline. The bitter winds, snowstorms, and plummeting temperatures made survival impossible without protection. For infants, whose small bodies could not regulate heat efficiently, a well-constructed shelter was the difference between life and death. Prehistoric humans became master architects of necessity, using caves, bones, hides, and natural materials to create spaces that offered warmth, safety, and a sense of continuity in a world dominated by ice and snow. Caves provided the most obvious refuge. Natural formations offered walls against the wind, ceilings to retain heat, and a solid foundation above frozen ground. Families would position hearths strategically near the center, maximizing warmth while minimizing the risk of accidental fires. Infants were placed close to fire, often wrapped in layers of furs or moss, so that the heat radiated gently without direct exposure. These cave havens became centers of daily life, where survival activities, from cooking to crafting to socialization, occurred under the sheltering protection of stone walls. When caves were unavailable, prehistoric humans turned to innovation. Mammoth bones, antlers, and large hides were combined to construct temporary huts, often insulated with layers of moss, grasses, and furs. These structures were surprisingly robust, capable of withstanding high winds and heavy snow. Interiors were organized with warmth in mind. Sleeping areas for infants and mothers were closest to fire, while workspaces for tool-making or food preparation were positioned further away. Even small details, like the direction of openings relative to prevailing winds, reflected an intimate understanding of the environment. Layering and insulation were central principles. Floors were lined with soft, warm materials, grasses, mosses, or multiple layers of hide, to prevent heat loss into frozen ground. Walls and roofs were thickened with furs and skins, and additional layers were added during the coldest nights. Swaddled infants were placed on these insulated surfaces, sometimes in combination with heated stones or bedding warmed by the hearth. Such attention to detail maximized warmth and minimized risk of hypothermia, ensuring that the youngest members could survive even in the coldest conditions. The placement of shelters within the landscape was strategic. Families selected sites near water sources, hunting grounds, and protected terrain. Proximity to food reduced travel in extreme weather, while natural barriers offer protection from predators. Elevated positions or shelters hidden in natural depressions provided both safety and efficiency, minimizing exposure while allowing the community to monitor surrounding areas. Every decision regarding location was deliberate, shaped by both survival needs and environmental knowledge. Community life within shelters was highly organized. Infants and mothers were grouped together in safe zones, protected from hazards and central to daily activities. Hearths were communal, their warmth radiating throughout the shelter, allowing social interaction, cooking, and tool-making to continue without endangering the youngest. Older children and adults were tasked with maintaining fire, repairing structures, and monitoring for intrusions, creating a network of care that enveloped infants in continuous protection. The shelter itself became a manifestation of social bonds, a physical representation of cooperation and vigilance. Portability was also crucial for nomadic groups. Temporary shelters had to be dismantled, transported, and reassembled as herds moved and seasonal resources shifted. Prehistoric humans designed their winter homes to be modular, using portable components like hide coverings, flexible wooden frameworks, and compact bedding. This allowed families to maintain warmth and protection even while on the move, ensuring that infants could travel safely across frozen landscapes without prolonged exposure to the elements. Shelters were also designed to mitigate predator threats. Entrances were often narrow or strategically positioned to prevent easy access, while fires, noise, and human presence served as deterrents. Infants were never left exposed. They were swaddled in protective layers and positioned in areas that maximized visibility for adults while minimizing vulnerability. These precautions demonstrate that shelter construction was not only about warmth, but also about comprehensive protection, integrating environmental, physical, and social considerations into a single, effective strategy. The psychological dimension of sheltering was equally significant. A warm, safe space provided infants with comfort and security, which supported growth, sleep, and emotional development. For adults, the act of maintaining a shelter fostered a sense of control and resilience in the face of a harsh and unpredictable environment. The knowledge that infants were protected allowed caregivers to focus on essential tasks like hunting, gathering, and crafting, reinforcing the interconnectedness of survival activities. Evidence of Ice Age shelters reveals remarkable sophistication. Archaeological sites show carefully arranged hearths, layered flooring, and structural reinforcements using bone and wood. Impressions of furs, moss, and grasses indicate deliberate insulation, while spatial organization suggests thought given to social interaction, infant safety, and task efficiency. These remnants underscore that prehistoric humans were not only surviving, they were engineering winter havens with extraordinary foresight and ingenuity. Even the smallest details mattered. The positioning of infants within the shelter, the layering of bedding, and the rotation of heated stones all contributed to a microclimate of warmth and safety. Swaddled babies were cradled close to the fire but shielded from direct exposure, insulated against drafts, and kept under continuous observation. Every element of shelter design was integrated into a comprehensive survival strategy, demonstrating the sophistication of Ice Age ingenuity and the deep care invested in the youngest members of society. Ultimately, shelters were more than physical structures. They were lifelines, symbols of human ingenuity, and centers of community. They embodied the integration of technology, social cooperation, and environmental knowledge, creating spaces where infants could endure the most extreme conditions. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, shelters transformed vulnerability into resilience, protecting life, nurturing growth, and allowing humanity to persist against overwhelming odds. In these winter havens, infants were more than passive occupants. They were the focal point around which ingenuity, social cooperation, and environmental adaptation revolved. Shelters were living systems, responding to cold, wind, predators, and community needs, all designed to ensure that the smallest, most fragile members could survive and thrive. Through careful planning, skilled construction, and constant vigilance, Ice Age humans crafted havens that allowed life to flourish amidst the frozen expanse. In the unforgiving cold of the Ice Age, shelter was more than a place to sleep. It was a lifeline. The bitter winds, snowstorms, and plummeting temperatures made survival impossible without protection. For infants, whose small bodies could not regulate heat efficiently, a well-constructed shelter was the difference between life and death. Prehistoric humans became master architects of necessity, using caves, bones, hides, and natural materials to create spaces that offered warmth, safety, and a sense of continuity in a world dominated by ice and snow. Caves provided the most obvious refuge. Natural formations offered walls against the wind, ceilings to retain heat, and a solid foundation above frozen ground. Families would position hearths strategically near the center, maximizing warmth while minimizing the risk of accidental fires. Infants were placed close to the fire, often wrapped in layers of furs or moss, so that the heat radiated gently without direct exposure. These cave havens became centers of daily life, where survival activities, from cooking to crafting to socialization, occurred under the sheltering protection of stone walls. When caves were unavailable, prehistoric humans turned to innovation. Mammoth bones, antlers, and large hides were combined to construct temporary huts, often insulated with layers of moss, grasses, and furs. These structures were surprisingly robust, capable of withstanding high winds and heavy snow. Interiors were organized with warmth in mind. Sleeping areas for infants and mothers were closest to fire, while workspaces for tool-making or food preparation were positioned further away. Even small details, like the direction of openings relative to prevailing winds, reflected an intimate understanding of the environment. Layering and insulation were central principles. Floors were lined with soft, warm materials, grasses, mosses, or multiple layers of hide, to prevent heat loss into frozen ground. Walls and roofs were thickened with furs and skins, and additional layers were added during the coldest nights. Swaddled infants were placed on these insulated surfaces, sometimes in combination with heated stones or bedding warmed by the hearth. Such attention to detail maximized warmth and minimized risk of hypothermia, ensuring that the youngest members could survive even in the coldest conditions. The placement of shelters within the landscape was strategic. Families selected sites near water sources, hunting grounds, and protected terrain. Proximity to food reduced travel in extreme weather, while natural barriers offer protection from predators. Elevated positions or shelters hidden in natural depressions provided both safety and efficiency, minimizing exposure while allowing the community to monitor surrounding areas. Every decision regarding location was deliberate, shaped by both survival needs and environmental knowledge. Community life within shelters was highly organized. Infants and mothers were grouped together in safe zones, protected from hazards and central to daily activities. Hearths were communal, their warmth radiating throughout the shelter, allowing social interaction, cooking, and tool-making to continue without endangering the youngest. Older children and adults were tasked with maintaining fire, repairing structures, and monitoring for intrusions, creating a network of care that enveloped infants in continuous protection. The shelter itself became a manifestation of social bonds, a physical representation of cooperation and vigilance. Portability was also crucial for nomadic groups. Temporary shelters had to be dismantled, transported, and reassembled as herds moved and seasonal resources shifted. Prehistoric humans designed their winter homes to be modular, using portable components like hide coverings, flexible wooden frameworks, and compact bedding. This allowed families to maintain warmth and protection even while on the move, ensuring that infants could travel safely across frozen landscapes without prolonged exposure to the elements. Shelters were also designed to mitigate predator threats. Entrances were often narrow or strategically positioned to prevent easy access, while fires, noise, and human presence served as deterrents. Infants were never left exposed. They were swaddled in protective layers and positioned in areas that maximized visibility for adults while minimizing vulnerability. These precautions demonstrate that shelter construction was not only about warmth, but also about comprehensive protection, integrating environmental, physical, and social considerations into a single, effective strategy. The psychological dimension of sheltering was equally significant. A warm, safe space provided infants with comfort and security, which supported growth, sleep, and emotional development. For adults, the act of maintaining a shelter fosters a sense of control and resilience in the face of a harsh and unpredictable environment. The knowledge that infants were protected allowed caregivers to focus on essential tasks like hunting, gathering, and crafting, reinforcing the interconnectedness of survival activities. Evidence of Ice Age shelters reveals remarkable sophistication. Archaeological sites show carefully arranged hearths, layered flooring, and structural reinforcements using bone and wood. Impressions of furs, moss, and grasses indicate deliberate insulation, while spatial organization suggests thought given to social interaction, infant safety, and task efficiency. These remnants underscore that prehistoric humans were not only surviving, they were engineering winter havens with extraordinary foresight and ingenuity. Even the smallest details mattered. The positioning of infants within the shelter, the layering of bedding, and the rotation of heated stones all contributed to a microclimate of warmth and safety. Swaddled babies were cradled close to the fire but shielded from direct exposure, insulated against drafts, and kept under continuous observation. Every element of shelter design was integrated into a comprehensive survival strategy, demonstrating the sophistication of Ice Age ingenuity and the deep care invested in the youngest members of society. Ultimately, shelters were more than physical structures. They were lifelines, symbols of human ingenuity, and centers of community. They embodied the integration of technology, social cooperation, and environmental knowledge, creating spaces where infants could endure the most extreme conditions. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, shelters transformed vulnerability into resilience, protecting life, nurturing growth, and allowing humanity to persist against overwhelming odds. In these winter havens, infants were more than passive occupants. They were the focal point around which ingenuity, social cooperation, and environmental adaptation revolved. Shelters were living systems, responding to cold, wind, predators, and community needs, all designed to ensure that the smallest, most fragile members could survive and thrive. Through careful planning, skilled construction, and constant vigilance, Ice Age humans crafted havens that allowed life to flourish amidst the frozen expanse. In the frozen landscapes of the Ice Age, fire was far more than a source of light. It was a heartbeat of survival. It provided warmth, a means to cook and preserve food, protection against predators, and a social center where knowledge and skills were shared. For infants, fire was essential. Their tiny bodies were especially susceptible to hypothermia, and the radiant heat of a hearth could mean the difference between life and death. Prehistoric humans developed a profound understanding of fire, not only in its practical applications, but also in its role as the linchpin of community survival. Mastering fire was a complex art. Friction, flint striking, and the careful management of tinder and kindling required skill, patience, and practice. Once ignited, fires had to be maintained constantly, especially during harsh winters when temperatures could plummet dramatically at night. Caregivers often took shifts, ensuring that flames never died out. This vigilance was particularly crucial for infants, who were kept near the hearth to benefit from its heat, but protected from direct exposure to prevent burns or overheating. Fire became both a protective and nurturing presence, surrounding the youngest with warmth and safety. Fire extended the capabilities of human survival in multiple ways. Cooking over flames made food safer, more digestible, and higher in calories, essential for mothers and infants. Meat, marrow, and tubers were roasted or boiled to maximize nutrient absorption, while boiling water reduced the risk of illness from contaminants. Smoke from fires also served as a natural insect repellent and predator deterrent. The careful placement and management of fire demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of its multifaceted utility. Heat, nutrition, protection, and hygiene all intersected in this single elemental tool. Beyond the physical benefits, fire had psychological and social significance. Its glow provided comfort in the darkness, reducing stress and anxiety during long winter nights. Communities gathered around the hearth to eat, craft tools, tell stories, and teach survival skills. Infants absorbed these rhythms, the warmth reinforcing emotional security, while the sounds and interactions prepare them for social integration later in life. Fire, in essence, was the center of daily life, a living pulse that connected survival, culture, and social cohesion. Strategic use of fire in shelters was critical. Hearths were positioned to radiate heat evenly, often with stones or earth to retain warmth. Smoke ventilation was carefully designed to avoid suffocating infants, while still discouraging insects and deterring predators. Heated stones could be placed near sleeping areas to extend warmth through the night, and bedding was arranged to trap the heat generated. This meticulous attention to detail reveals that prehistoric humans were not only aware of fire's basic properties, but had developed sophisticated methods to integrate it seamlessly into the domestic environment. Fire was also a teaching tool. Young members of the community observed its creation, maintenance, and application. Elders demonstrated how to manage flames safely, how to cook food efficiently, and how to use smoke and light to communicate or protect the group. These lessons were not trivial. They were crucial for the continuity of survival strategies, ensuring that knowledge about fire and its applications was transmitted from generation to generation. Infants, even in their earliest months, were part of this education, absorbing rhythms, sounds, and patterns that would later inform their skills and understanding of the environment. In hunting and gathering, fire played a strategic role. Smoke could be used to drive herds into traps or to conceal movements from predators. In winter, small controlled fires kept hunters warm during long tracking expeditions or while processing game far from the main shelter. These techniques reflect a sophisticated understanding of cause and effect, timing, and environmental manipulation. Fire was not just a tool, it was an active participant in survival strategies, shaping human behavior and reinforcing cooperative efforts. The protective role of fire cannot be overstated. Predators such as wolves, cave lions, and bears were deterred by flames, and the presence of fire allowed communities to venture into otherwise dangerous terrain. Infants were kept at safe distances, swaddled in layers, and positioned near adults who could respond immediately if threats arose. Fire created a controlled environment amidst chaos, giving caregivers the ability to safeguard the most vulnerable while still maintaining essential survival tasks. Even in moments of scarcity, fire amplified limited resources. Cooking increased the caloric value of food, reduced spoilage, and allowed small quantities to be stretched further. Heated stones extended warmth, reducing the need for constant movement and conserving energy. Smoke was used strategically to preserve hides and repel pests. Each use of fire represented an extension of human ingenuity, turning a simple natural phenomenon into a comprehensive survival system. Archaeological evidence highlights the centrality of fire in Ice Age life. Hearths, charred bones, and traces of heated stones have been found across Europe, Asia, and North America. These sites reveal careful placement, layering, and repeated maintenance, indicating that fire was managed intentionally and continuously. In shelters, the proximity of hearths to sleeping areas and the arrangement of protective layers suggest deliberate strategies to optimize warmth and safety, particularly for infants. Fire was both a tool and a sanctuary, a constant presence in the precarious world of the Ice Age. Ultimately, fire was a heartbeat around which survival revolved. It provided warmth to fragile bodies, cooked food to sustain growth, and created a social center where knowledge, skills, and culture were transmitted. For infants, fire meant protection, comfort, and life. The presence of fire in the shelter transformed a cold, threatening landscape into a livable environment, allowing families to endure winters that might otherwise have been fatal. Fire was not merely a survival tool. It was a symbol of human resilience, ingenuity, and care. Through its warmth and light, fire united families, safeguarded infants, and amplified every other survival strategy. It became a silent guardian in the night, a constant presence in the struggle against cold, scarcity, and predators. In the Ice Age, mastery of fire was a defining edge between life and death, and a heartbeat that allowed humanity to persist, grow, and thrive despite the harshest of winters. In the frigid expanse of the Ice Age, survival depended on the ability to retain body heat, and clothing became the armor that shielded humans from the relentless cold. Infants, with their small bodies and underdeveloped thermoregulation, were especially vulnerable. Prehistoric humans, through observation and experimentation, developed sophisticated clothing systems using furs, hides, and natural fibers to create layered protection. Every garment, wrap, and swaddle was a calculated adaptation to the harshest environment humanity had yet faced. The primary material was animal hide, harvested from mammoths, reindeer, bison, and other large mammals. These hides were processed carefully. Fur was preserved for insulation, while the underlying leather was softened for flexibility. Scrapers, awls, and bone needles allowed prehistoric humans to fashion clothing that fit snugly and retained warmth. Multiple layers were common, with inner layers absorbing moisture and outer layers providing wind and water resistance. For infants, swaddling in several layers of fur ensured that even in extreme cold, heat was trapped close to the body. Tailoring and fitting were surprisingly advanced. Clothing was designed to allow movement while maximizing thermal efficiency. Armholes, hoods, and foot coverings were carefully constructed, reflecting an understanding of ergonomics and human anatomy. Infants were swaddled in ways that balanced warmth and comfort, with layers arranged to prevent drafts and maintain circulation. Even small adjustments, like tucking a hood or overlapping fur layers, had a significant impact on survival, demonstrating the meticulous attention paid to the needs of the youngest and most fragile members of the group. Layering was a central principle. Just as modern cold weather gear relies on multiple layers, Ice Age humans combined thin underlayers with thicker outer furs. Inner layers kept the skin dry and retained heat, while outer layers shielded against wind, snow, and rain. Infant swaddling often mirrored this approach. Soft furs close to the skin cushioned the body and absorbed moisture, while heavier pelts provided insulation and protection. This layered strategy created a microclimate around the infant, a portable environment of warmth that could withstand sub-zero temperatures. Accessory items, such as mittens, boots, and hoods, were equally critical. Small extremities lose heat quickly, making protection essential for infants. Boots were shaped from flexible hides, sometimes stuffed with grasses or moss, to insulate against frozen ground. Mittens or hand coverings were crafted to allow some mobility while preventing frostbite. Hoods protected the head and neck, key areas for heat retention, and were often tied securely to prevent slipping. Every detail was deliberate, highlighting an understanding of how the human body loses heat and how clothing could counteract these dangers. Processing hides was both a technical and time-consuming task. Furs had to be cleaned, stretched, softened, and sometimes stitched into composite garments. This required skill, patience, and knowledge of materials. Women and men alike participated, often teaching the next generation the techniques required for successful clothing production. Even infants, though unable to contribute physically, were at the center of these efforts. Their protection was the motivation behind meticulous crafting, and their survival justified the time-intensive labor of hide preparation and sewing. Clothing also had a communal and symbolic role. Garments often reflected status, age, or role within the group. Infants might be wrapped in furs with particular patterns, textures, or layers indicating family identity or protective symbolism. Beyond practical warmth, clothing became a medium of cultural expression, linking survival strategies with social cohesion. The act of dressing an infant in carefully prepared furs was thus both a practical necessity and a reaffirmation of community bonds. Innovation in clothing extended to mobility. Nomadic families required garments that could be adjusted, layered, or quickly removed during travel. Fur cloaks and wraps could be repositioned or doubled to account for changing weather conditions. Infants were often carried in slings lined with soft furs, allowing caregivers to move freely while ensuring that the baby remained insulated. This adaptability allowed human groups to traverse snow-covered plains, frozen rivers, and icy slopes without exposing infants to dangerous cold. Archaeological evidence confirms the sophistication of Ice Age clothing. Impressions of textiles, fur, and hide found in caves, along with preserved fragments of sewn garments, indicate careful construction and attention to fit. Tools such as bone needles and scrapers reveal a well-developed toolkit dedicated to clothing production. These findings underscore that prehistoric humans were not merely draping themselves in hides. They were designing, tailoring, and innovating clothing systems optimized for extreme winter survival. Clothing was inseparable from other survival strategies. Layered furs complemented shelters, fire, and nutrition, creating a multi-layered system of protection. Fire radiated warmth, shelters shielded from wind and snow, and clothing maintained a portable microclimate. Infants were the ultimate beneficiaries of this synergy. Swaddled in furs, near fires, and sheltered within protected spaces, they experienced a combined effect of multiple survival strategies working together. This integrated approach illustrates the complexity and intelligence of Ice Age life. Ultimately, clothing and furs were more than just protection. They were lifelines. They allowed infants to endure freezing temperatures, survive long journeys, and participate safely in the rhythms of daily life. The ingenuity behind layering, tailoring, and insulation reflects the deep understanding prehistoric humans had of their environment and their bodies. Every stitch, every layer, every swaddle was an act of care and foresight, ensuring that the youngest, most fragile members of the community could not only survive, but thrive. Through clothing, prehistoric humans transformed raw hides into armor, turning vulnerability into resilience. Infants, enveloped in warmth and protection, became central to a system of survival that combined knowledge, skill, and cultural practice. In the Ice Age, clothing was not merely practical. It was a declaration of human ingenuity, a shield against cold, and a testament to the care invested in life's most precious beginnings. Survival in the Ice Age was a constant negotiation with the environment. While shelters, fire, clothing, and social bonds provided localized protection, prehistoric humans were not static. They moved, seasonally, strategically, and sometimes desperately, in search of food, safety, and suitable climates. Migration during the harsh winters was particularly perilous, yet it was often essential for survival. Families, with infants in tow, navigated frozen rivers, snow-covered plains, and icy forests, relying on knowledge, ingenuity, and social cooperation to endure what would seem impossible to modern eyes. Ice Age migration was driven by multiple factors. Seasonal changes dictated the availability of food. Large herbivores moved along predictable routes, plants became scarce, and water sources froze over. Predators followed prey, and human groups often had to relocate to maintain access to essential resources. Infants were the most vulnerable during these journeys, unable to generate sufficient body heat or move independently. Caregivers had to plan meticulously, ensuring that travel routes were safe, shelter options were available, and warmth and nutrition could be maintained for the entire group. Transporting infants required both innovation and strategy. Babies were swaddled in layers of furs and carried in slings, cradles, or sledges. These carriers allowed parents and older children to navigate treacherous terrain while keeping infants insulated from wind and cold. Heavy snow or ice could slow progress, and carrying infants added an extra layer of complexity. Yet prehistoric humans adapted, developing methods to move efficiently without compromising safety, demonstrating an extraordinary combination of foresight, physical endurance, and communal coordination. Planning for winter migration involved more than just transportation. It required resource management. Groups carried extra furs, fire-starting materials, preserved food, and tools to construct temporary shelters. Storage and rationing were critical, as delays caused by storms or ice could be deadly. Every step of the journey was calculated, balancing speed with the need to protect infants and conserve energy. These strategic movements were not random. They were guided by a profound understanding of the environment, animal behavior, and seasonal patterns. Hazards during winter journeys were numerous. Blizzards, thin ice, avalanches, and predators posed constant threats. The cold intensified these dangers, making frostbite, hypothermia, and exhaustion serious risks, especially for infants and weaker members. To mitigate these threats, groups relied on collective vigilance. Adults and older children took turns scouting, maintaining fires, and assisting those carrying infants. Shelters were occasionally erected even during migration, using snow walls, temporary wooden frameworks, or hidden caves to provide brief reprieves from the elements. Every pause was a carefully considered survival tactic. Migration also had social and cultural implications. Groups often traveled together or converged with other bands, sharing knowledge, resources, and survival techniques. Infants, though silent participants, were central to these interactions, as their safety encouraged cooperation and collective responsibility. Observing the movement of infants influenced group behavior. Adults coordinated tasks, shared burdens, and ensured that the youngest are protected, reinforcing social cohesion and interdependence. In essence, the presence of infants shaped both the logistics and the social dynamics of migration. Learning and adaptation were critical for successful journeys. Adults observed weather patterns, animal tracks, and frozen landscapes to choose optimal routes. Knowledge of terrain, snow conditions, and seasonal hazards was passed down through storytelling and demonstration, often centered around experiences with caring for infants in harsh conditions. These lessons were not theoretical. They were practical, life-saving wisdom that allowed successive generations to navigate winter landscapes with increasing efficiency. The survival of infants reinforced the value of this knowledge, making every journey both a test and a learning opportunity. Fire and temporary shelters played a vital role during migration. Campfire provided warmth during overnight stops, while insulated bedding and furs ensured that infants could sleep safely despite freezing temperatures. Smoke from fires could also deter predators and signal the presence of human groups to allies or neighboring bands. These strategies illustrate that migration was not merely about movement. It was a mobile system of survival, integrating fire, shelter, clothing, and social coordination to protect the most vulnerable. Nutrition during migration posed additional challenges. Fresh food was often scarce, and foraging or hunting could be complicated by snow and ice. High energy, fat-rich foods were prioritized for caregivers and infants, and preserved foods, dried meat, marrow, or stored plant materials, were consumed strategically to sustain energy. Breastfeeding continued to be a critical source of nutrition for infants, providing hydration, warmth, and essential antibodies. Resource allocation required careful planning and foresight, as the smallest members of the group depended entirely on adults for sustenance. Migration also reinforced the importance of resilience and problem-solving. Ice Age humans constantly adapted to changing conditions, developing new tools, refining clothing, and adjusting shelter design for travel. Infants, though passive, were central to these innovations. Their needs inspired the creation of portable bedding, adjustable furs, and sledges that could withstand snow and ice. In this way, the vulnerability of the youngest members spurred technological and social advancements that benefited the entire community. Archaeological evidence supports the reality of these winter migrations. Sites show clusters of temporary shelters, traces of sledges, fire pits in exposed locations, and layers of animal remains indicating hunting and preservation strategies during seasonal movements. Footprints and trails suggest careful navigation across frozen landscapes, often with infants in tow. These findings underscore that migration was a deliberate, strategic, and highly organized component of Ice Age survival, shaped by environmental knowledge, social bonds, and the imperative to protect the youngest. Ultimately, winter migration was a testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and collective care. Prehistoric humans transformed the challenges of frozen landscapes into a structured system of survival. Every step, every shelter, and every shared task was coordinated to ensure that infants and other vulnerable members could endure the harshest conditions. These journeys were more than physical movement. They were expressions of resilience, intelligence, and the deep bonds that allowed humanity to thrive in a world dominated by ice. Migration, while perilous, reinforced the interconnectedness of all survival strategies. Fire, clothing, tools, shelters, nutrition, and social bond were not isolated elements. They were integrated into a mobile system that enabled life to persist. Infants, swaddled and protected, were at the heart of these journeys, shaping the very methods by which humans adapted to winter landscapes. Through these movements, prehistoric humans demonstrated that even in the harshest environments, life could endure, evolve, and continue, a testament to resilience and the power of cooperation. Life in the Ice Age was harsh, unpredictable, and often dangerous, and prehistoric humans sought meaning and protection through rituals and spiritual practices. Infants, representing both vulnerability and continuity, were central to these beliefs. Communities recognized the fragility of new life and developed customs, symbols, and ceremonies to safeguard it. These practices were intertwined with daily survival, reinforcing social cohesion, emotional bonds, and a sense of control in a world dominated by cold, predators, and scarcity. Rituals surrounding birth and infancy were likely deeply symbolic. While precise details are lost to history, archaeological evidence suggests that infants were honored through burials, painted cave art, and the careful arrangement of protective objects. Swaddling may have included charms or markings intended to ward off harm, invoking spiritual protection alongside physical warmth. These gestures reflected a belief in forces beyond the immediate environment and a desire to influence them in favor of life and safety. Cave art offers glimpses into these spiritual dimensions. Images of animals, human figures, and abstract symbols may have served as protective motifs, ensuring the well-being of infants and the broader community. Some caves contain depictions near areas that were likely used for birthing or infant care, suggesting a connection between visual representation and ritual practice. Through these images, communities could communicate beliefs, reinforce cultural norms, and create a sense of continuity between generations. Material culture further reflects the spiritual life of infants. Objects such as pendants, amulets, or carefully arranged bones may have been placed near infants in shelters or burials. These items were likely imbued with symbolic meaning, serving both as protective talismans and as expressions of care and reverence. The selection, preparation, and placement of these objects indicate intentionality and a sophisticated understanding of symbolism, revealing that even the youngest members were integrated into spiritual and cultural life. Rituals extended to daily care as well. The act of swaddling, positioning near fire, or layering furs may have been accompanied by verbal incantations, songs, or gestures intended to invoke protection. Lullabies, rhythmic sounds, and repetitive motions not only soothed infants, but may have been interpreted as ritualistic acts, blending practical care with spiritual reassurance. Through these actions, caregivers instilled a sense of safety, reinforcing emotional and social bonds, while addressing existential fears in an environment where survival was uncertain. Community involvement amplified the spiritual significance of infants. Births were likely communal events, with multiple caregivers participating in both practical and symbolic roles. Elders may have offered guidance, prayers, or blessings, while peers contributed through support and shared vigilance. This collective attention not only increased survival chances, but also reinforced a shared belief system, strengthening social cohesion and the integration of infants into the spiritual and cultural life of the group. The interplay between fear and reverence shaped practices. Infants represented both hope and fragility. They were embodiments of the future, yet acutely vulnerable to environmental threats. Rituals acknowledge these realities, combining protective strategies with symbolic actions to mitigate unseen dangers. Practices that may appear superstitious to modern eyes were deeply rational in context. They addressed both emotional needs and physical survival, ensuring that infants were cared for holistically. Ceremonial burials provide compelling evidence of these beliefs. Archaeologists have found infants interred with pigments, shells, or animal figurines, suggesting an intentional acknowledgement of spiritual or symbolic dimensions. These burials indicate that infants were not merely passive members of society. They were revered, protected, and woven into the cultural fabric through acts that transcended immediate survival concerns. Such practices highlight the intersection of physical care, emotional attachment, and spiritual meaning in prehistoric communities. Rituals and beliefs also reinforce knowledge transmission. Stories, songs, and symbolic gestures surrounding infants conveyed practical lessons about care, protection, and survival. By integrating learning into spiritual and ritualized contexts, communities ensured that essential knowledge was memorably encoded, transmitted across generations, and imbued with emotional significance. Infants, though silent, became central participants in a system that blended culture, survival, and spirituality. The emotional dimension cannot be overstated. Rituals surrounding infants provided caregivers with a sense of agency and control, reducing anxiety in an unpredictable environment. Caring for infants through structured practices, whether through swaddling, fire placement, or symbolic gestures, offer reassurance that every precaution had been taken. These acts foster resilience, strengthen bonds between caregivers and infants, and reinforce communal responsibility, illustrating the inseparability of emotional, practical, and spiritual dimensions in survival strategies. Ultimately, the spiritual life of infants in the Ice Age was a mirror of human ingenuity and compassion. Prehistoric humans recognized that survival was not merely physical. It involved emotional, social, and symbolic dimensions. Rituals, beliefs, and practices surrounding infants created a framework in which life could be nurtured, celebrated, and protected, blending the tangible and intangible into a coherent system of care. Infants were central to these practices, embodying hope, continuity, and the precious potential of future generations. Through rituals and spiritual engagement, Ice Age humans transformed vulnerability into reverence. Infants were cradled not only in furs, but in meaning, protected by both practical measures and symbolic acts that reflected care, knowledge, and cultural sophistication. In the harsh landscapes of the Ice Age, spirituality became a form of resilience, a way to assert agency over uncertainty and safeguard life in its most fragile form. The youngest members of society, enveloped in warmth, protection, and ritual, became living symbols of endurance, hope, and the human capacity to thrive even in the most extreme conditions.